A year ago today in Orlando, as in thousands upon thousands of other cities around the world, people who are called queer people, lesbians, gay men, bisexuals, and transgender people of all colors, as well as people who are just called people, again, of all colors of the human rainbow, opened themselves and invited love to enter at the sound of welcome from within. They felt new life beginning as they experienced the healing balm and ease that love brings to our relationships. At the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, it was Latin night, and there were still more than 300 queer people there as the last call for drinks was announced. Shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning on June 12th of 2016, it was not love that knocked and waited to hear, but a deeply disturbed individual, a foe who didn't only threaten and condemn the patrons of the Pulse nightclub, most of whom were brown-skinned like himself. 50 people died that early morning, including the gunman, and nearly as many more were injured during the shooting rampage, hostage situation, and subsequent rescue and resolution by area law enforcement. Brown people mostly, which cannot be a coincidence in this country, which is a racist country, which is gun country. Poet James Fitzpatrick is correct. This is no coincidence. 29-year-old Omar Mateen found a group of people to take his rage out on, who he despised. And he knew a large percentage of the U.S. population also despised. Queer people of color whose citizenship status is constantly questioned. What a strange power to be cursed with for the proof of our desire to move men to violence. The stated source of Mateen's rage, U.S. foreign policy and bombings of targets in the Middle East. That source cannot be completely untangled from the identities of the people he took it out on. What he and his victims have in common is the enormously degrading effects of the system of white supremacy that pervades our socioeconomic and political structures. The victims and the survivors were there just to be themselves. At the nightclub, if not elsewhere, they didn't let themselves feel scared. They refused the fear that those with privilege and power do their utmost to foist upon people who are different from themselves. And God's wrath be upon them. In all seriousness, to be alive, to live out loud boldly is an act of resistance for people who are othered because of their race, class, sex and gender, sexual and affectional orientation, and gender identity. This is true for anyone who's not a member of the dominant religious or theological worldview as well. Also true if you are an immigrant or a child of immigrants. Those of us who identify with one or more marginalized communities, with any combination of the many intersecting and interlocking oppressions, seek out spaces where we can leave the hate outside. For LGBT people, gay bars and nightclubs have been one of those spaces. This sanctuary is too. The Pulse patrons had no inkling that they would die in this way on that night. How else would they have had a good time? How else can any of us live if we have nowhere that is safe for us to just be? The month of June is considered the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and their allies, LGBTQIA+ communities' Pride Month. I hope you're all feeling that pride. On June 12th last year, there had already been activities and events, parades and parties in cities around the world celebrating our pride in our truths as queer people, being who we are and loving our diversity. I personally had been to the Boston Pride Parade the day before. Still more cities all over the planet were poised to be flamboyant and festive, flaunting our pride with humor and style and panache. Quickly, the Pride celebrations took on new meaning and power as even more people of all kinds turned out and showed up to express their grief and their support, to resist the kind of hatred that results in such violence. Lisa and I were moved to make the 2-hour drive up to Portland, Maine, to take part in the parade there that weekend after the Pulse massacre. It was amazing. Love knocked and people responded in 2016, just as they did in 1969 after the Stonewall riots in New York City. On June 28th of that year, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people rioted after police raided the Stonewall Inn, a popular gay bar on Christopher Street. Days of riots and protests ensued, calling attention to the brutal treatment of queer people by police and vice squads. Since then, annual Pride parades have grown in number and size. Progressive churches have joined in the parade, showing that they are allies in the fight for LGBT rights. And even more people responded as allies in 2016 after the Pulse nightclub massacre, the deadliest in the nation's history and in the history of gay liberation. This was a different kind of response to violence against our siblings. So much has changed in the 5 decades since Stonewall. It seems like a distant past. And the hidden lives of same-sex loving people in the decades and centuries before Stonewall are ghosts of ancient history. Only 1 year before the Pulse tragedy, in June of 2015, the United States Supreme Court had struck down discriminatory marriage laws and affirmed that marriage between two consenting adults, regardless of sex and gender identity, is legal. Celebration 1 year, tragedy the next. Such is the nature of progress. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We had a president who loved us. Now we have one that doesn't. Where are we this year? How strong is the pulse of resistance? Immediately after the January inauguration of Donald Trump as the 45th President of the United States, all references to LGBT people and their rights were removed from the White House website. Then in February, the Trump administration withdrew guidelines for the use of restrooms and facilities in public schools that correspond to a trans student's gender identity in joint action from the Justice Department and the Department of Education. However, the U.S. Supreme Court sent back to a lower court in Virginia a case involving a trans student's suit to use the restroom corresponding to their gender identity, and New York City school teachers are required to use the trans student's pronoun of choice. What's more, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the 1964 Civil Rights Act includes protection from discrimination in employment on the basis of sexual orientation. A review of global activity related to civil and human rights for LGBT people suggests that there is more life-affirming vitality in the courts of law than death-defying actions in public opinion. For example, while the Islamic Authority in Malaysia endorsed the use of conversion therapy in the first half of 2017, many cities and state governments here in the U.S. are condemning this detrimental approach to mental health treatment for queer-identified individuals. Lifetime blood bans of gay men enacted during the early hysteria about HIV and AIDS have been rescinded in Ireland and Switzerland. Same-sex marriages are becoming legal at a rapid pace around the world, including through changes in church doctrine, such as that of the Church of Norway. These global and national gains must not overshadow the real escalation in attacks on LGBTQIA+ people. The Southern Poverty Law Center reports that hate crimes against queers, immigrants, black and brown folks, Muslims, and women have risen dramatically. Discrimination based on errant perceptions of sex and gender happens regularly, even to our young children. Earlier this week, Lisa, who regularly delivers the day's news to me, told me a sad but true story indicative of how low some adults will go. There was a news story about an 8-year-old Nebraska girl who has a short hairstyle and loves to play soccer. Apparently, she's really talented and plays above her age level. Well, she was disqualified from playing in a girls' soccer tournament with her team because of an error made on a registration form. Her sex was accidentally marked as boy, male on one form and as girl, female on another. Her parents brought along her birth certificate showing that she is indeed a she, as determined at birth by the medical team, and I know there are problems with that too for many people who are indeed transgender, but that's a whole different saga. The long and short of this story was that no matter what proof was offered regarding this child's biological sex, because we aren't talking about the more nuanced issue of gender identity in this case, she was denied the opportunity to play with her teammates. No ifs, ands, or buts. Shameful. Truly shameful. 8 years old, and she didn't understand why she couldn't play. Her father tried to explain it in language appropriate for her grade level, but it doesn't make any sense. She couldn't make any sense of it as a result. Fortunately, after a few down days, she was back outside dribbling and passing her soccer ball again. When they go low, we go high. Thank goodness that kids are resilient. It's hard for some of us to maintain that resilience over decades of discrimination, but we all need to do everything we can to preserve the integrity and worth of every person. We can and we must raise our voices in outrage that any of our children be treated in these discriminatory ways. Our continued resistance to those appointed to positions in the current administration, as well as keeping the pressure on local and state politicians and governmental departments and speaking truth to power about their activities, will be critical to stemming the reversing tide that has been ushered in on that cold day in January. If you don't have plans to attend one of the many longest table dinners around Tallahassee this evening, you could show up at the State Capitol complex between 5 and 7:30 p.m. for the Equality March for Unity and Pride and Pulse Vigil. Speakers will include one of the Pulse survivors and our own Angel, among others. Thank you, Angel. Angel is going to sing for us a song with flute accompaniment, and I would like to read the English translation to you before he does. The song is Prophecy, O My People. Prophecy, O my people, prophecy one more time. Let your voice be the echo of the outcries of all oppressed. Prophecy, O my people, prophecy one more time. Announce to them the coming of a new society. I sanctify you, prophet. Banish all doubt and fear. Be faithful to your mission, the quest that leads us on. Announce to all the people that justice promised long, restored to every nation, true peace throughout the world. Denounce all who are causing oppression, sorrow, and tears. Let truth be your protection, the light of a new sun. Let this be what you hope for, the battle that you choose, to build a social order with justice at its core.